Ethan Daniels stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his sleek Manhattan penthouse, gazing out at the dazzling cityscape. The world below was alive with lights, a constant reminder of the empire he had built. The tech mogul had everything: an enviable career, an opulent home, and a wife who had stood by his side through thick and thin. Yet, an unshakable restlessness gnawed at him. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, the amber liquid catching the city lights. Memories of his early days with Rachel surfaced unbidden. Back in college, they'd been dreamers. Late nights spent coding together in the university lab, cheap takeout dinners, and shared ambitions had been their foundation. Rachel had always believed in him, even when his startup was nothing more than a rough idea sketched on napkins. She was there when he secured his first investor and again when his company went public, catapulting him into the elite circles of wealth and influence. But somewhere along the way, life had shifted. Their shared dreams had become solitary pursuits. Rachel, now a successful pediatrician, poured her energy into her demanding career. Ethan's days were consumed by board meetings and product launches. Their evenings, once filled with laughter and intimate conversations, had turned into silent dinners or quick exchanges about schedules. The spark that once defined their relationship seemed to have dimmed. Rachel, despite her kindness and intelligence, had become a symbol of routine to Ethan. And for a man who thrived on innovation, routine was suffocating. One evening, at a gala hosted by one of his investors, Ethan met Mia Reynolds. She was a striking young model with an air of spontaneity and adventure that Ethan found irresistible. She spoke of travels to exotic places, of dreams untethered by practicalities. Her laughter was infectious, and her energy reminded Ethan of a part of himself he thought he had lost. Their encounters became more frequent, first at events, then private lunches, and finally evenings spent in intimate conversations. With Mia, Ethan felt a rush of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. She was the antithesis of his structured world, a whirlwind of unpredictability that made him feel alive. But every time he returned home to Rachel, guilt tugged at him. Rachel was nothing but supportive, even in her exhaustion after long hospital shifts. She didn't question his late nights or distracted demeanor, trusting him as she always had. Yet, that trust only deepened Ethan's internal conflict. One night, as he lay in bed beside Rachel, staring at the ceiling, he realized that his restlessness wasn't just about Mia. It was about himself. He had everything he had ever wanted, yet it felt incomplete. The man who once dreamed of changing the world now felt trapped in a gilded cage of his own making. Ethan's thoughts drifted to the crossroads ahead. Was it possible to reignite the spark with Rachel, or was he chasing something that no longer existed? His growing connection with Mia complicated the answer. And as the city buzzed with life outside, Ethan Daniels wrestled with a question that had no easy answer. Was he willing to risk everything he had for the possibility of something more? Ethan stood in his penthouse kitchen, staring at his untouched coffee. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a golden glow, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, tangled in a web of guilt, desire, and indecision. Rachel's voice broke his reverie. "Ethan, did you see the calendar? I've moved my shift tomorrow so we can have dinner together for our anniversary. It's been a while since we celebrated properly." Her tone was light, hopeful even, but Ethan could hear the underlying strain. She was trying to bridge the widening gap between them, trying to hold onto the relationship they had built through years of shared struggles and triumphs. "Yeah," Ethan replied, forcing a smile. "Sounds good." Rachel nodded and went back to packing her bag for another long day at the hospital. Ethan watched her for a moment. Her movements were efficient but tired, her once bright eyes dimmed by exhaustion. She had always been beautiful to him, not just because of her appearance, but because of her strength and resilience. Yet now, as he observed her, he felt an uncomfortable distance. The truth was, he had already made up his mind. Ethan's relationship with Mia had grown into something he could no longer ignore. With her, he felt a sense of freedom that had been absent from his life for years. She was a reminder of who he once was, or at least, who he thought he wanted to be again. But the weight of his decision felt insurmountable. How could he walk away from Rachel, the woman who had been his partner in every sense of the word. As the days passed, Ethan found himself retreating further into his own world. He stayed out later, citing work as an excuse, but the truth was, he was with Mia. Their time together felt electric, a sharp contrast to the routine he associated with Rachel. But every stolen moment with Mia brought him closer to the inevitable confrontation. He knew he couldn't keep living this double life. The guilt was suffocating, and the cracks in his marriage were becoming too wide to ignore. One evening, Rachel surprised him with a candlelit dinner at home. She had cooked his favorite dishes, and a bottle of his preferred wine sat open on the table. She looked radiant, her exhaustion temporarily masked by the effort she had poured into making the evening special. "I know things have been tough lately," she began, her voice steady but vulnerable. "With work, with us. But I believe in what we have, Ethan. I want us to find our way back to each other." Her words pierced through him. For a brief moment, he considered abandoning his plan, finding a way to make things work. But then the restless part of him, the part that yearned for something more, reasserted itself. "I don't know if that's possible," he said quietly, avoiding her gaze. Rachel's expression faltered. "What do you mean?" I think we've grown apart, and I don't know if we can fix it." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Rachel searched his face, trying to understand the depth of what he was saying. "Ethan, we've been through so much together. Whatever this is, we can work through it. We just need to try." But Ethan shook his head. "I don't think trying is enough anymore." The conversation ended there, unfinished and raw. Rachel retreated to their bedroom, leaving Ethan alone at the table with the remnants of the meal she had lovingly prepared. The next morning, he made his decision final. He called his lawyer and began the process of filing for divorce. He couldn't bring himself to tell Rachel in person, so he left the papers on the dining table on the morning of their anniversary, a cowardly act that would haunt him for years. When Rachel came home that evening, expecting the dinner they had planned, she found the papers instead. Her heart sank as she read the words, her hands trembling. The realization of what was happening hit her like a tidal wave. Ethan didn't wait to see her reaction. By the time Rachel discovered the papers, he had already packed a bag and left. He moved into a luxury apartment across town, a place he and Mia had visited once during a casual outing. For Ethan, this marked the beginning of a new chapter. But as he settled into his new life with Mia, a nagging sense of unease lingered. He told himself it was just an adjustment period, that he had done what was necessary to find happiness. Yet deep down, he couldn't shake the image of Rachel standing in their empty home, staring at the papers that had shattered their shared life. As he sat in his new apartment, surrounded by the trappings of his wealth, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if he had truly made the right choice, or if he had lost something irreplaceable in his search for freedom. Rachel sat on the couch, the divorce papers trembling in her hands. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. The dinner table was still set for the anniversary celebration she had meticulously planned. Candles waiting to be lit, dishes of their favorite food now cold and untouched. The stark contrast between the warmth she had hoped for and the cold reality of the papers before her left her feeling hollow. Her first instinct was denial. This couldn't be real. Ethan wouldn't leave her, not like this. She reread the documents, searching for some explanation, but the words only confirmed the truth. The man she had loved, the man she had supported through every triumph and failure, had decided to walk away. Tears blurred her vision as waves of betrayal and confusion washed over her. She replayed their last conversation, trying to pinpoint where everything had gone wrong. She had known they were struggling, his distance, his late nights, but she never imagined it would come to this. For days, Rachel moved through life in a fog. Her colleagues at the hospital noticed her quiet demeanor, but she brushed off their concerns, claiming she was just tired. In truth, she was drowning. At night, in the silence of their once shared home, she cried until exhaustion claimed her. 2 weeks later, as Rachel struggled to adjust to her new reality, life threw her another curveball. She had been feeling unusually fatigued and queasy, symptoms she initially attributed to stress. But when they persisted, she decided to take a pregnancy test, just to rule it out. When the test showed positive, Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Disbelief turned into shock as she realized the implications. She made an appointment with her OBGYN the very next day, desperate for confirmation. The ultrasound appointment was surreal. As the technician moved the wand across her abdomen, Rachel stared at the screen, waiting. And then she heard it. The rhythmic, unmistakable sound of a heartbeat. And another. And another. The technician smiled gently. "Congratulations, Dr. Carter. You're having quadruplets." Rachel's jaw dropped. Quadruplets? Yes. It's rare, but everything looks healthy so far. We'll monitor you closely, given the risks associated with multiples, but you're in good hands. The news hit Rachel like a tidal wave. Quadruplets. For lives growing inside her, each dependent on her for their survival. She left the clinic in a daze, clutching the ultrasound printouts in her hands. Over the next few days, the initial shock gave way to determination. Rachel had always been a fighter, and she wasn't going to let her circumstances define her. If Ethan could walk away, so be it. She would do this on her own. She began researching everything she could about multiple births. Her medical background helped her navigate the risks, but the emotional and logistical challenges were daunting. How would she manage her career, her finances, and raising 4 children on her own? The questions swirled in her mind, but Rachel refused to let fear paralyze her. She started making changes. The spare room in her home, once an office, was emptied to make space for a nursery. She reached out to her closest friends and family, quietly sharing the news and accepting their offers of support. She leaned on her colleagues at the hospital, many of whom rallied around her with advice, encouragement, and even offers to babysit when the time came. Through it all, Rachel found strength in the thought of her children. They became her anchor, the reason she pushed through the pain and uncertainty. She would be their mother, their protector, and their champion. Ethan might have left, but she would ensure that her children never felt the absence of love or security. As the weeks turned into months, Rachel began to find her footing. The nursery started to take shape. 4 cribs lined up neatly, shelves stocked with books and toys, and walls painted in soft, calming colors. She attended every doctor's appointment without fail, tracking the progress of her quadruplets with equal parts excitement and nerves. Rachel's resilience surprised even herself. She realized that while Ethan's departure had broken something in her, it hadn't destroyed her. If anything, it had revealed a strength she didn't know she possessed. She was no longer just Rachel Carter, the devoted wife and skilled pediatrician. She was now a mother-to-be, forging a new path for herself and her children. And as she stood in the nursery one quiet evening, her hand resting on her growing belly, Rachel whispered a promise to her unborn children. "I'll always be here for you, no matter what." It was a vow made in solitude, but one that gave her the courage to face the uncertain future ahead. The first flutter of movement from her babies brought Rachel to tears. She was halfway through her second trimester, and though the journey had been exhausting, it was moments like this that made it all worthwhile. She placed a hand on her belly, marveling at the life within her. 4 tiny hearts, 4 little miracles. Rachel had fully immersed herself in preparing for the arrival of her quadruplets. The nursery had gone from a simple spare room to a vibrant haven for her children. Walls painted in soft pastels were adorned with hand-drawn illustrations of stars, clouds, and animals, each detail lovingly chosen by Rachel. 4 cribs were neatly arranged, each with personalized bedding gifted by her colleagues at the hospital. Her days were a whirlwind of activity. Between her hospital shifts, she attended prenatal classes specifically tailored for mothers of multiples, learning everything from managing premature births to the intricacies of breastfeeding 4 babies at once. She read every book she could find about raising multiples, taking meticulous notes and consulting with neonatologists and pediatric specialists she trusted. But it wasn't just about the logistics. Rachel also threw herself into creating a support network. Her colleagues, friends, and even patients rallied around her. One of her closest friends, Laura, organized a surprise baby shower, filling Rachel's living room with laughter, warmth, and enough baby supplies to stock a small store. "You're going to be amazing at this," Laura said, handing Rachel a beautifully wrapped gift. Inside was a framed quote that read, "You never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice." Rachel clutched the frame tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. "I hope so," she whispered. Her colleagues at the hospital also became an invaluable source of strength. They admired Rachel not just as a pediatrician, but as a mother-to-be determined to give her children the best start in life. Many of them stepped in to lighten her workload, ensuring she could balance her demanding job with her pregnancy. At her routine doctor's appointments, Rachel listened intently as her OBGYN detailed the progress of each baby. The ultrasounds became her favorite part of the visits. Seeing the tiny forms of her children, hearing their heartbeats echo in the room, it filled her with a mix of awe and responsibility. One afternoon, her doctor's tone turned serious. "Rachel, carrying quadruplets is a remarkable journey, but it's also a high-risk pregnancy. You need to take it easy. No overexertion, and we may need to schedule an early delivery by C-section. Your health and the baby's health come first." Rachel nodded, absorbing the gravity of the situation. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." As her pregnancy progressed, Rachel adapted her life to accommodate the challenges. She cut back on her hospital shifts, spent more time at home, and focused on her well-being. She began practicing mindfulness, carving out moments of calm amidst the chaos. In her quiet moments, Rachel often thought about Ethan. She hadn't told him about the pregnancy. The pain of his departure was still raw, and the thought of bringing him back into her life, even for the sake of their children, was something she wasn't ready to face. For now, she decided, her focus had to be on her babies and herself. Despite the physical toll of carrying quadruplets, Rachel found strength in the small victories, assembling the last crib, feeling her baby's kick, receiving encouragement from her friends and colleagues. Each milestone reinforced her resolve. One evening, Rachel sat in the nursery, running her hands over the edges of a crib. The room was ready, but was she? Fear crept in, whispering doubts about how she would manage 4 newborns alone. But then she looked at the ultrasound pictures on the wall, each labeled with the names she had chosen: Noah, Caleb, Emma, and Lily. "You are my purpose," she said softly, her voice steady, "and I will give you everything I have." As her due date approached, Rachel found herself embracing her new reality with a mix of determination and hope. She wasn't just surviving. She was preparing to thrive, ready to meet the greatest challenge of her life head-on. Rachel knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she wasn't walking it alone. She had her children, her friends, her colleagues, and most importantly, her own unyielding strength. Together, they would build a future filled with love, resilience, and endless possibilities. The day arrived earlier than expected. At 32 weeks, Rachel was rushed to the hospital after experiencing intense contractions. The medical team, well prepared for the complexities of a multiple birth, moved swiftly to perform a C-section. Rachel lay on the operating table, her heart pounding. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, but nothing could prepare her for the overwhelming mix of fear and anticipation coursing through her. She focused on her breathing, gripping Laura's hand tightly as her friend offered soothing words. Within minutes, the room filled with the sounds of new life. One cry, then another, and another. For tiny voices joined in an imperfect chorus, each note breaking Rachel's tension and filling her with awe. Tears streamed down her face as the nurses announced, one by one, "Baby Noah is here. Baby Caleb has arrived. Here comes baby Emma. And baby Lily." Rachel craned her neck to catch glimpses of her babies as they were gently whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU. Born prematurely, each child needed immediate monitoring and care, but the doctors assured her they were stable. After the surgery, Rachel was wheeled into recovery, her body exhausted but her spirit alight. The NICU staff allowed her to see the babies later that evening. She gazed at the 4 tiny beings, each nestled in their incubators, tubes, and monitors surrounding them. Despite their fragility, they were perfect in her eyes. "You're here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "and I'm going to do everything I can to give you the best life possible." The days that followed were grueling. Rachel split her time between recovering from the surgery and visiting her babies in the NICU. The staff, familiar with her background as a pediatrician, provided updates on the baby's progress with a mix of professionalism and warmth. Noah, the eldest, had a strong cry and a determined spirit, often wriggling his tiny fingers as if reaching for the world. Caleb was quieter, his calm demeanor earning him the nickname Little Sage among the nurses. Emma, the smallest, was a fighter, surprising everyone with her resilience. Lily, with her curious eyes, seemed to soak in her surroundings even at this early stage. Rachel began to bond with each of them in unique ways. She spent hours at their bedsides, talking to them, singing lullabies, and touching their delicate hands whenever the nurses allowed. She quickly adapted to the NICU routine, learning how to feed them through tubes, monitor their vitals, and change their tiny diapers. After several weeks, the babies grew stronger. One by one, they were discharged from the NICU, coming home to the nursery Rachel had so lovingly prepared. The first night all four were under her roof was both chaotic and magical. Rachel quickly learned that managing quadruplets was an endless cycle of feeding, changing, and soothing. Sleep became a distant memory as she juggled the demands of four newborns. But despite the exhaustion, Rachel found joy in the smallest moments. A coo, a tiny hand grasping her finger, the sight of all four sleeping peacefully in their cribs. Her days were a blur of activity, but Rachel thrived on the structure. She developed a meticulous schedule to ensure each baby received the care and attention they needed. Her medical background proved invaluable, allowing her to anticipate and address the unique challenges of raising premature multiples. Word of Rachel's quadruplet spread, and soon, her clinic began receiving more patients. Many sought her out for her expertise, inspired by her story and her ability to balance motherhood with her career. Rachel, determined to provide for her children, poured herself into her work, even as she remained present for her babies. Despite the long hours and constant demands, Rachel felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. She was building a life for her children, one filled with love, resilience, and hope. One evening, as Rachel sat in the nursery rocking Lily to sleep, she looked around at her other three children. Noah was babbling softly to himself, Caleb was clutching a stuffed bear, and Emma was staring up at the ceiling with wide, curious eyes. "You're my world," Rachel murmured, her voice soft but resolute. "And I promise, I'll never let you down." Rachel's life as a single mother to quadruplets was far from easy, but she wouldn't trade it for anything. Each day brought new challenges, but it also brought moments of joy and connection that reminded her of why she fought so hard to keep moving forward. She was no longer defined by what she had lost. Instead, she was defined by what she had gained. A family that filled her heart and gave her life a purpose she never could have imagined. The years passed in a whirlwind for Rachel. Her quadruplets, Noah, Caleb, Emma, and Lily, filled her days with chaos and joy. The nursery that once held cribs and pastel walls was now a playroom bursting with toys, drawings, and the laughter of four vibrant children. Rachel's days were a careful balance of work and motherhood. As her children grew older, so did her reputation as a leading pediatrician. Her clinic had become a haven for parents, and her expertise, especially with premature and high-risk babies, made her highly sought after. But no matter how demanding her work was, her evenings were reserved for her children. She cherished every moment with them. The bedtime stories, the messy dinners, and even the sibling squabbles. Each child was developing their own personality. Noah was bold and ambitious, always eager to take the lead. Caleb was thoughtful and creative, often building intricate structures out of blocks. Emma, small but mighty, had a fierce determination that belied her size. Lily was the dreamer, her love of drawing evident in the dozens of colorful pictures plastered on the walls. Rachel had built a life filled with love and purpose. But the past had a way of resurfacing when she least expected it. One evening, Rachel received an invitation to a high-profile charity gala supporting neonatal research. The event was hosted by a prestigious foundation and promised to bring together influential figures from the medical, philanthropic, and corporate worlds. Rachel hesitated at first. Her work and family life left little room for such events, but the cause was close to her heart, and she knew attending could benefit her clinic. Dressed in an elegant navy blue gown, Rachel arrived at the gala, her presence commanding but understated. She moved through the crowd with ease, exchanging pleasantries and discussing her work with potential donors. Then, she saw him. Ethan stood near the stage, his tall frame unmistakable, even in the bustling crowd. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his expression one of confidence as he conversed with a group of business leaders. The years had changed him. There was a touch of gray at his temples, and his demeanor was more subdued. But Rachel recognized him instantly. Her heart clenched. She hadn't seen him since the divorce. For years, she had avoided thoughts of him, focusing solely on her children and her career. But now, seeing him here, the memories came rushing back. The love they once shared, the pain of his betrayal, and the life she had built without him. Ethan, sensing her presence, turned. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. "Rachel," he said, his voice low and filled with a mixture of surprise and something she couldn't quite place. "Ethan," she replied, her tone cool but composed. He approached her, his movements tentative. "It's been a long time." "It has," she said, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor. Ethan glanced around, as if searching for the right words. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I'm here for the foundation," Rachel replied. "Their work is important, especially for children like mine." The mention of her children seemed to catch him off guard. His eyes widened slightly, but he quickly recovered. "You look well," he said, awkwardly shifting the conversation. Rachel offered a polite smile but said nothing. She had no intention of delving into personal matters, especially not here. As the evening progressed, Rachel did her best to avoid Ethan, immersing herself in conversations with other guests. But she could feel his gaze on her, a weight she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't until the end of the event that their paths crossed again. Rachel was speaking with a fellow pediatrician when Ethan approached, his expression serious. "Rachel," he said softly, waiting until she turned to face him, "can we talk? Privately." She hesitated, her instinct to refuse. But something in his tone, perhaps a hint of vulnerability, made her pause. "All right," she said after a moment, "but only for a few minutes." They stepped outside into the crisp night air, the sounds of the city humming in the background. Ethan looked at her, his expression filled with emotions she couldn't decipher. "I didn't expect to see you tonight," he began. "But now that I have, there's something I need to say." Rachel crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "Go on." "I know I hurt you," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I made choices I can't take back, and I lost the best thing that ever happened to me. Seeing you here, knowing everything you've accomplished, it only makes me realize how much I threw away." Rachel's jaw tightened. "You made your choices, Ethan, and I made mine. I've moved on, and I'm happy with the life I've built." "I can see that," he said, his gaze sincere. "But I want to know more about your life. About them." The implication was clear. Ethan had seen the photos on her phone during the gala, the images of 4 smiling faces that resembled his own. Rachel stiffened. "This isn't the time or place for that conversation." "Please," Ethan said, his voice almost pleading. "I just want to know. Are they?" "They're my children," Rachel said firmly, cutting him off. "And their happiness and stability are my priority. If you truly care, you'll respect that." Ethan nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "I understand. But if there's ever a chance, if you ever think it's right for me to know them, I'll be here. I just want to be part of their lives, if you'll let me." Rachel said nothing, her emotions warring within her. She turned and walked back into the building, leaving Ethan alone in the cool night air, the weight of the encounter pressing down on them both. For Rachel, the future was clear. Her children came first. But Ethan's unexpected presence had stirred something she hadn't felt in years, uncertainty. And with it came questions she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. The days that followed the charity gala were a blur for Rachel. She threw herself into her work and her children, focusing on the tasks at hand. But no matter how hard she tried to push it away, the encounter with Ethan lingered in the back of her mind. His presence at the event had been a stark reminder of a past she had worked so hard to move beyond. It wasn't just the memories of their failed marriage that troubled her. It was the realization that Ethan, despite everything, still seemed to care. She had spent so many years building a life without him, fighting for her children, her career, and herself. But now, faced with his regret and desire to reconnect, she found herself questioning everything. Back at home, the children were her anchor. They were growing rapidly, their personalities becoming more pronounced with each passing day. Noah's adventurous spirit continued to blossom, while Caleb's quiet brilliance amazed her. Emma's fierce independence and Lily's artistic sensibilities were traits that Rachel had learned to nurture in their own ways. She loved them fiercely, more than she had ever loved anyone. But the quiet moments alone, those rare fragments of time where she had to confront her thoughts, were when the doubts crept in. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Rachel sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering lights of the city outside her window. She thought about Ethan. She thought about his apology, his request to know his children. And most of all, she thought about what that meant for her family, and for the future. Would it be fair to bring him back into their lives? Could she ever forgive him for abandoning her when she needed him most? She had worked so hard to create a stable, loving environment for her children. And now, with Ethan's unexpected reappearance, the possibility of everything being disrupted loomed over her. As Rachel sat with her thoughts, she realized one thing. She couldn't make this decision alone. Her children were too important. Their happiness, their stability, had to come first. And she had to consider what role, if any, Ethan could play in their lives. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan was also struggling with the consequences of his actions. After the gala, he couldn't shake the guilt that had been gnawing at him for years. The conversation with Rachel had stirred feelings he had long buried. Seeing her again, strong, successful, and thriving, had only amplified the weight of his mistakes. But it wasn't just the guilt over his failed marriage that troubled him. It was the knowledge that he had missed out on something irreplaceable, his children. For all the success he had achieved in his business ventures, nothing compared to the emptiness he felt in his personal life. The cold, sterile walls of his Manhattan apartment felt more suffocating than ever. The sleek modern furniture, the cutting-edge technology, the pristine surfaces, all of it was a facade. It was a life devoid of warmth, of meaning. Ethan couldn't help but wonder how different his life would have been if he had stayed with Rachel. If he had been there for her, and for their children. The thought of his children, for little lives he had never met, haunted him. He had made his wealth, but at what cost? He had tried to bury the regret with work, with distractions, but nothing seemed to help. He reached out to his assistant, asking for a list of the upcoming events Rachel would be attending. He knew it was a long shot, but he wanted to find a way to reconnect with her. Slowly, cautiously. He didn't expect things to go back to the way they were. He didn't deserve that. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to make things right. Ethan began to realize that the pain he had caused Rachel and the void left in his own life couldn't be erased with a simple apology or a few nice gestures. It would take time. He needed to show Rachel that he was serious about being a part of their children's lives, not just for his sake, but for theirs. Over the next few weeks, Ethan made subtle attempts to show Rachel that he was committed to being a better person. He sent her a few thoughtful emails about the work she was doing with her clinic, expressing admiration for her dedication. He also reached out to some mutual friends, asking about the children, trying to learn more about their lives. He was careful not to overstep, but he couldn't ignore the growing ache in his chest, the ache that told him he needed to do more. For Rachel, each of Ethan's gestures was a reminder of the complex web of emotions she had tried to untangle for years. Part of her wanted to forgive him, wanted to believe that he could change. But another part of her was terrified that opening the door to him again would undo everything she had worked so hard to build. One afternoon, as Rachel was finishing a long day at the clinic, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. It was brief, simple, and sincere. "I'm not asking for anything right now, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'll respect your decisions, but I hope one day I can be a part of their lives." Rachel stared at the message for a long time. The weight of it felt heavier than she had anticipated. She knew the decision she was facing was monumental, but it wasn't just about her and Ethan anymore. It was about her children. She knew she couldn't let her feelings for Ethan cloud her judgment. She had to consider her children, and she needed to protect them. But part of her, just a small part, wondered if there could be room for forgiveness in the future. If there could be a chance for Ethan to truly redeem himself, not just for himself, but for their children as well. With a deep sigh, Rachel typed a response, her fingers shaking slightly as she tried to make sense of the thoughts swirling in her mind. We need to talk, but on my terms. As she hit send, Rachel felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope that the past could be rewritten, if only one step at a time. The days following Rachel's message were an agonizing wait for Ethan. He had spent years avoiding the reality of his decisions, drowning himself in work and avoiding the consequences of the choices that had torn his family apart. Now, Rachel had given him a sliver of hope, a chance to make amends, but only on her terms. He had to respect that. He had no right to rush her, no right to demand anything more than what she was willing to give. In the weeks that followed, Ethan took careful, measured steps. He didn't push Rachel. He didn't bombard her with gifts or try to play the role of the apologetic ex-husband. Instead, he waited. He knew this was not a situation that could be fixed overnight, and he was prepared for the long road ahead. When Rachel agreed to meet him in person, it was at a small cafe tucked away in the quiet corner of the city. She had chosen the location deliberately, somewhere private, a place where they could talk without the prying eyes of the public or the distractions of their lives. Ethan arrived early, his heart racing as he waited for her. The cafe was cozy, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint aroma of pastries. He watched the door, willing himself to remain calm, but the nervous energy in his body was impossible to ignore. Finally, Rachel walked in. She looked just as beautiful as he remembered, her sharp features softened by a calm demeanor that reflected her growth over the years. The weight of motherhood had added a new strength to her, a quiet confidence that radiated from her every move. She was no longer the woman he had left behind. She was stronger, wiser, and more certain of herself than ever. As she approached the table, Ethan stood up to greet her. She gave him a small nod but didn't offer her hand. He respected that. It was clear she was cautious, and he had no right to push. "Thank you for meeting with me," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the years that had passed. Rachel nodded, taking a seat across from him. Her gaze was sharp, assessing. "I didn't do this for you, Ethan. I did it because I need to understand what you want, what you're willing to do. I need to know what kind of man you've become before I decide what role, if any, you can have in my children's lives." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The words stung, but they were true. He deserved no special treatment, no forgiveness that hadn't been earned. He took a deep breath and looked Rachel in the eye. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I don't expect anything from you, Rachel. I've made my mistakes, and I've spent the last few years living with the consequences. What I want now is simple. I want to be part of their lives. But I know that has to happen on your terms, and it won't happen overnight. I can't fix the past, but I'm here. I'm willing to put in the work, if you'll allow me." Rachel leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she processed his words. There was silence between them for a moment, the weight of the decision she had to make pressing on her. "I'm not sure if I can ever forgive you for what you did," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "You left me to raise 4 children on my own. I did it. I managed. But the damage you caused isn't something that can be erased with a few words. And my first priority, always, will be my children. I need to protect them, Ethan. I need to know that they won't be hurt by you coming into their lives." Ethan swallowed hard, the sting of her words cutting deep. He had no defense, no justification for what he had done. All he could do now was listen and show her that he was willing to do whatever it took to prove he was worthy of a second chance. "I understand," he repeated, his voice hoarse, "and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. What I'm asking for is a chance to show you, through my actions, that I can be the man you and the kids deserve. I want to be a father to them, but I'll wait, as long as it takes." Rachel studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. Ethan could see the conflict in her eyes. She wasn't sure, and who could blame her? She had built a life without him, a life that had been full of love, laughter, and security. She didn't need him to make her whole. She had already done that on her own. But as she looked at him, there was a flicker of something, perhaps a small sliver of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. "I'm not making any promises," Rachel said, her voice firm, "but I'm willing to give you the opportunity to prove yourself. Not to me, but to them. My children are my everything, Ethan, and they come first. If you can show me that you can be the father they deserve, then maybe we can talk about taking this one step at a time." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the chance he had been waiting for, the chance to rebuild the bridge he had burned so many years ago. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and he knew there would be no shortcuts, but he was willing to fight for it. "I'll prove it to you," he said with conviction, "and to them. I'll do whatever it takes." Rachel didn't respond immediately. She simply stood up, her eyes never leaving his. "We'll see," she said softly before walking out of the cafe, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. As Ethan sat there, the weight of the conversation settling in, he realized just how much work lay ahead. This was only the beginning, but for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The road to redemption was long, but he was ready to walk it, one step at a time. And for the first time, he truly understood the meaning of patience. The weeks following his meeting with Rachel felt like an eternity for Ethan. Every day, he woke up with a singular purpose: to prove to Rachel and to himself that he could be the father his children deserved. His thoughts constantly returned to the idea of his 4 children, whom he had never met, and the possibility that they might one day accept him into their lives. Rachel had been clear. His path to redemption would not be easy. But now, for the first time, Ethan felt a deep resolve. The foundation for this journey had been laid, but the real test would be when he finally met his children. It was a Saturday morning when Rachel called him with the news. "We're meeting at the park this afternoon," she said, her voice steady. "It's the first step, Ethan. You'll meet them, but remember, it's only a first step. Don't expect anything more than that." Ethan's heart raced as he heard the words. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He'd spent years building his empire, but none of it had ever felt as important as this. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing. This was a chance to start over, to show them he wasn't the man he had been. When Ethan arrived at the park, he saw Rachel first, sitting on a bench with her back to him. She looked calm, composed, everything he admired about her, but now he saw it differently. She was no longer the woman who had once been his wife. She was a mother now, stronger and more confident, and he knew the responsibility of being part of her children's lives was a burden he could never take lightly. He walked toward her, his breath shallow. She glanced up as he approached, her expression unreadable. "They're playing over there," she said, nodding toward a nearby playground where a group of children were gathered. Ethan followed her gaze, his eyes settling on the 4 children who had once been a dream to him, a future he had abandoned. They were beautiful, so different from what he had imagined. Each of them had their own distinct features, yet there was no mistaking the family resemblance. Noah, with his dark eyes and unruly hair, looked like the curious, adventurous spirit Rachel had described. Caleb, quiet and observant, seemed lost in thought, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a level of concentration that made Ethan marvel at how grown-up he seemed. Emma, the eldest, had Rachel's intelligence and a sharpness in her gaze that reminded Ethan of himself in some ways. And then there was Lily, the youngest, who seemed to have inherited Rachel's gentle, artistic nature. Rachel stood up, walking toward them, and Ethan followed. They stopped at the edge of the playground, where the children were now climbing the jungle gym, laughing and talking among themselves. Rachel called out to them, "Hey, guys, come over here for a second." The children looked up, their faces lighting up with curiosity. They approached slowly, their eyes moving from Rachel to Ethan and back again, unsure of what to expect. It was clear they hadn't been told much about their father, but they seemed to sense something was different. "Kids, I want you to meet someone," Rachel said gently. "This is Ethan, your father. He's here to get to know you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times in his mind, but nothing could have prepared him for the way it felt in real life. The children stood still for a moment, studying him with wary eyes. They had every right to be cautious. He was a stranger to them, and Rachel had made it clear he wouldn't be treated like a hero. Caleb, the quiet one, was the first to speak. His voice was soft, but there was a strength in it that caught Ethan off guard. "You're our dad?" he asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I'm your father." For a moment, there was silence. Ethan could feel the weight of the children's eyes on him, each one trying to make sense of this new person in their lives. He didn't know what to say. He had no script, no words that could erase the years of absence. Emma, the eldest, was the next to speak. "How come you weren't here?" Her words were blunt, the directness of a child who hadn't learned to mask their emotions yet. "Why didn't you stay with Mom?" Ethan's throat tightened, and he struggled to find the words. How could he explain the mistakes he had made? How could he tell them the truth without sounding like an excuse? I made a lot of mistakes," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry for that. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now, but I hope, over time, I can show you that I can be the father you deserve." Rachel's eyes softened as she watched the interaction unfold. She had been right to give Ethan the chance to meet them, but she also knew this wasn't a moment that would change everything. It would take time, patience, and most of all, consistency. Lily, who had been quiet up until now, stepped forward. "Will you come to our school plays?" she asked, her voice filled with innocence. "And our dance recitals?" Ethan's heart swelled at the question. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear. He wanted to be there for them. He wanted to be part of their lives in a way he hadn't even allowed himself to dream of before. "I'd like that very much," he said softly. "I'd like to be there for you. All of you." The conversation was slow and cautious, with the children asking simple questions and Ethan doing his best to answer honestly. It wasn't perfect, and there were no grand revelations or tearful reunions. But it was a start, a fragile, tentative beginning. As the afternoon wore on, Rachel watched her children interact with Ethan, seeing their initial hesitation gradually turn into something more. Curiosity, maybe even the first spark of acceptance. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. As they left the park, Rachel turned to Ethan. "This isn't over," she said, her voice firm. "You have a long way to go before they trust you. But this is a good first step. Don't let it be the last one." Ethan nodded, feeling both hopeful and overwhelmed. This was only the beginning, but for the first time, he felt like maybe he could make it right. Maybe he could be the father his children deserved. The weeks following Ethan's first meeting with his children were both a triumph and a struggle. The cautious optimism Rachel had allowed him to have was tempered by the reality that his relationship with them was still fragile, still in its infancy. The children, though polite and open in their initial interactions, were still unsure of him. They had spent years without a father figure, and now, here he was, trying to step into that role, a man they knew only by name, not by experience. Rachel had made it clear from the beginning that Ethan's relationship with the kids would be slow, that trust couldn't be rushed. She had warned him that it wasn't just about showing up for the big moments. He would need to be there for the quiet, everyday moments too. Ethan understood, but he also knew he had to prove himself in more concrete ways. He had no experience with children, not like Rachel did, but he was determined. Every interaction with the kids, no matter how small, felt like a test he had to pass. His wealth, his success, none of that mattered now. All that mattered was showing the children that he could be a reliable, steady presence in their lives. It was a Saturday afternoon when Ethan invited Rachel to a cafe to discuss the next steps. He wanted to know how he could be involved in their lives beyond just showing up for an occasional playdate or family outing. He needed a more structured approach. If he was going to be a father to them, he needed to know what that looked like. Rachel had been hesitant at first, but she agreed. She had no illusions about what Ethan's involvement would mean. Her priority would always be her children's well-being. But seeing him take initiative, wanting to be involved beyond the superficial, made her feel a flicker of hope. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Ethan began, after they had settled into a quiet corner of the cafe. "I know this isn't about just showing up at events or sending gifts. I want to be part of their daily lives, but I don't know what that looks like." I want to know more about them, what they need, what they like, what scares them, what excites them. How can I be the kind of father they need? Rachel studied him for a moment, her expression guarded. It's a lot more than just being there for the fun stuff, she said slowly. They need consistency. They need to know they can rely on you, that you won't disappear again when things get tough. And it's not just about them either. You have to show me too, that I can trust you, that you're here for the long haul. Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He could sense how much she had invested in this, how much she had done on her own. The idea of a family had been hers to carry for so long, and the trust she was placing in him now was not something she could give lightly. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan said, his voice steady. I know I've made mistakes, and I can't erase the past, but I'm here now. I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I'm serious about this. I want to build something real with them. Rachel took a deep breath, her gaze softening just slightly. I'm willing to give you that chance, Ethan. But remember, this is their future we're talking about. You need to be prepared for the responsibility that comes with being a father. Ethan felt a pang of uncertainty deep inside, but he pushed it down. He didn't have the luxury of second-guessing himself anymore. This was about more than his mistakes. It was about making sure his children had a stable, loving environment. It was about showing them that, despite everything, they had a father who was committed to being there for them, no matter what. Over the next few weeks, Ethan made a concerted effort to become more involved in the children's lives. He spent time with each of them individually, listening to Caleb's fascination with engineering, discussing Emma's love of literature, sharing his own experiences with Noah's curiosity about the world. Ethan found that the more he listened, the more he understood about each child's personality and needs. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of silence, awkward pauses, and times when he felt like an outsider in their lives. But there were also small victories. Lily's shy smile when he complimented her artwork, Caleb's willingness to ask him for help with a science project, Emma's excitement when he showed interest in the books she was reading. But it was with Rachel that Ethan felt the greatest strain. He had promised to prove himself, to show her that he was committed to being a father. And though she had agreed to let him be involved, there were moments when he sensed her hesitance. She was still protective of the children, rightfully so, and she didn't want to allow him back into their lives unless she was absolutely sure it wouldn't hurt them. One evening, after a particularly busy week of visits and conversations with the kids, Ethan and Rachel sat down together once more. This time, it wasn't in a public space, but in her living room, the atmosphere quieter, more intimate. Rachel poured them both a glass of wine, and for the first time, the conversation turned to the future. You've been doing well, Rachel said, her tone neutral but kind. I've seen you making an effort with them. They're starting to warm up to you, even if they don't show it yet. But I'm still not sure how all of this is going to look long-term. Ethan met her gaze, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I'm not asking for anything big right now, he said softly. I know it takes time, but I want to be there for them. I want them to know I'm here, that I care. And I'll respect your boundaries, your rules. I'm not trying to force my way into their lives. I'm just trying to be there for them, in the way that works best for all of us. Rachel studied him for a long moment before speaking again. I can see you mean it, Ethan. But it's not just about you and them. It's about us too. I need to know that you understand that I'm not going to let anyone jeopardize the stability we've built. I'm their mother, and I've been doing this on my own for a long time. I can't allow you to be a part of their lives if I don't feel like you're doing this for the right reasons. Ethan nodded. He understood. This was a huge responsibility, one that went beyond his past mistakes, beyond the pain he had caused. It was about trust, about showing Rachel that he could be a stable, reliable presence, not just for her, but for the children. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Rachel, he said quietly, but I want to earn your trust. And I want to show you that I'm here, for good. Rachel took a deep breath and set her wine glass down. You've taken the first step, but there are many more to come. Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with each conversation, each small moment with his children, he felt like he was moving closer to the family he had lost. He would do whatever it took to make things right. For Rachel, for his children, and for himself. The weeks turned into months, and the children's understanding of their new relationship with Ethan continued to evolve. Slowly, Almost imperceptibly, their walls began to come down. It wasn't an overnight transformation, and there were times when the gap between them and Ethan felt insurmountable, but the steady progress was undeniable. For Ethan, these small steps meant more than anything he had ever achieved in his professional life. The quiet moments with each of his children were becoming his new measure of success. Rachel had been right to urge caution, but now she was beginning to see the positive changes too. She watched as Ethan made the effort to attend school events, to help with homework, to simply spend time talking with the children. He wasn't trying to be their best friend or their hero. He was just there, consistently showing up. And that, Rachel realized, was the foundation of something real. One afternoon, while Rachel was preparing dinner in the kitchen, Ethan sat down with Caleb at the dining room table, helping him with a project for school. Caleb, who had been initially distant, had grown to look forward to these quiet sessions with Ethan. The boy's fascination with technology had sparked a deep connection with Ethan, who found himself sharing more about his own experiences in the tech industry. Caleb's eyes lit up as he listened, and soon they were brainstorming ideas for the next science fair. "I think we could make a model of a self-driving car," Caleb said excitedly, his hands moving across the table as he sketched out the design. "That's an ambitious project," Ethan replied, a grin tugging at his lips, "but I think it's doable. Let's start with the basics. We can work on it together." Rachel peeked into the room, a soft smile crossing her face. She had been cautious at first, but seeing Ethan interact with Caleb in such an organic, natural way made her feel a glimmer of hope. There were still many hurdles ahead, but she could no longer deny that Ethan was making the effort, and it was paying off. Later that evening, Ethan took Noah and Emma to the park, just the three of them. Emma, who had always been the more reserved of the children, had slowly started to open up during their outings. She had a soft spot for animals, and one of their visits had included a stop at a local animal shelter where Emma had spent hours interacting with the animals. It was an interest Ethan had never known she had, but it gave him a new way to connect with her. "This cat's name is Whiskers," Emma said as she gently stroked a fluffy tabby. "I think he likes me." "I think he does," Ethan said, kneeling beside her. "He seems to be purring pretty loudly." Noah, who had always been the more energetic one, was climbing on the jungle gym nearby, but even he came over to check on them. "I want to get a dog," Noah declared, his voice full of excitement. "A big one, like a German shepherd." Ethan chuckled. "You know, dogs are a lot of responsibility. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'll take care of it," Noah responded, his face lighting up with determination. Rachel watched them from a distance, her heart swelling with mixed emotions. She had once feared that the children's relationship with Ethan would remain distant, or that they might resent his presence in their lives. But instead, she was seeing them bond, each child finding a way to connect with him in their own time, in their own way. When they returned home, Rachel was waiting for them, and Ethan could see how her gaze softened when she saw how the children were interacting with him. There was a quiet understanding between them now. She didn't need to say anything. The progress was evident. As days passed, Ethan found more and more opportunities to step into their lives. He helped Emma with her English homework, suggesting books she might like, and joined Noah for a weekend of hiking, where they talked about everything from sports to Noah's latest obsession with dinosaurs. Even Lily, the youngest, had started seeking him out when she needed help with a school assignment or just wanted someone to listen. One evening, as they all sat together in the living room, Rachel found herself watching them, a quiet sense of relief settling over her. It was hard to admit, but she had begun to feel something like peace. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight of everything on her own. Ethan was becoming a part of their family, not just a visitor, not just an occasional presence, but a consistent, steady figure who cared deeply for the children. After the kids went to bed, Rachel and Ethan sat together on the couch, talking about the day's events. "I never thought I'd see this day," Rachel said softly, her eyes searching his. "I never thought you'd actually be here, doing this. It's not easy, but I think they're starting to understand." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a slow process, but I'm willing to take it one step at a time. I want to be the kind of father they need, and I'm learning every day what that means." Rachel smiled faintly. "You're doing better than I thought you would," she admitted. But don't get comfortable just yet. There's still a long way to go. Ethan chuckled, grateful for her honesty. I wouldn't expect anything less. But I'm in this for the long haul, Rachel. I'm not going anywhere. It was a simple promise, but for Rachel, it was the most important one he could make. She had never asked for perfection, but she needed to see Ethan be real, not just for her, but for the children. Over the next several weeks, the bond between Ethan and the children only grew stronger. Though there were still moments of uncertainty, there was a deepening sense of trust, and the children began to look to him as a figure they could rely on. Ethan's relationship with Rachel, though still fragile, was slowly mending. They had come a long way from the fractured past, but Rachel knew there was still a long road ahead. Yet for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. As the months went by, the life that Ethan and Rachel had carefully begun to rebuild began to take shape. The children, now comfortable in their new dynamic, grew more attached to Ethan with each passing day. They no longer saw him as the distant father who had once walked away, but as a present, reliable figure, someone who was genuinely invested in their lives. Ethan had spent the last several months showing up for the kids, and in the process, he had begun to discover a new version of himself. It wasn't the driven, tech mogul who had once believed that success in business was the pinnacle of achievement. He had learned that success in life was measured in the relationships you built, the way you showed up for others, and how much love you were willing to give, even when it wasn't easy. For Rachel, the transformation had been just as significant. Watching Ethan change, watching him work to earn her trust and the trust of the children, made her realize that she had been holding on to the past for too long. She had been fearful of letting him back in, afraid of repeating the mistakes they had made. But now, as she watched him laugh with Caleb over a new robotics project or sit down on the floor with Emma to read her a book, Rachel knew that they were moving into a new chapter. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define them either. One afternoon, as the family gathered around the dining table to eat, Ethan leaned back in his chair, taking in the noise, the laughter, the familiar sounds of family life that had once seemed so foreign to him. He had missed out on so much over the years, but now, this was where he wanted to be. The children had embraced him, slowly but surely, and Rachel was learning to trust him again. After dinner, as the kids scattered to finish their homework or play in the living room, Rachel and Ethan lingered at the table, their conversation taking a quieter, more intimate turn. "I've been thinking about everything lately," Rachel said, her voice soft but steady. "About us. About what we've built here. I never expected things to go this way, but I'm grateful." Ethan reached across the table, his hand finding hers. "I don't deserve the chance you've given me, Rachel, but I'll keep proving myself. For you and for them." Rachel smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "You don't have to prove anything anymore. You're already here, and that's enough." The weight of her words settled over Ethan. He had been trying so hard to fix the past, to make up for the time he had lost, that he hadn't fully realized just how far he had come. The children had accepted him into their lives, and Rachel was beginning to find peace with the man he had become. There was no perfect resolution, no grand gesture to wipe away the hurt they had both carried. But there was something far more important, a sense of understanding, of growth, and of mutual respect. As they sat in the quiet after dinner, watching the children from a distance, Ethan's mind wandered to the future. He had no illusions about the road ahead. Raising children wasn't easy, and repairing a fractured relationship wasn't instantaneous. But for the first time in a long time, he had hope. He had the chance to be the father the children deserved, and he had a partner in Rachel, someone who understood the value of second chances. Ethan's phone buzzed on the table, interrupting the moment. It was a reminder about an upcoming business conference, a world away from this peaceful family life. For a moment, he thought about the decision he had made years ago to prioritize his career over everything else. It had cost him so much, but he had learned a crucial lesson. No amount of wealth or success in business could replace the love and connection he now had with his children. His role as a father was the most important one he would ever play. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Rachel and Ethan sat on the couch together. The television was off, and the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant hum of the refrigerator. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had made different choices? Rachel asked, breaking the silence. Ethan thought for a moment before responding. Every day. But I've come to realize that what matters is where we go from here. We can't change the past, Rachel. We can only move forward. She nodded, her gaze distant but peaceful. I used to think I had to have everything figured out, but now I'm learning to just live with the decisions I've made and to trust that we're doing the best we can. Ethan smiled softly, a sense of contentment settling over him. He had never imagined this life for himself, one filled with everyday moments of family and love. But now that he had it, he didn't want to let go. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges ahead. But for the first time in years, he felt at peace. The family he had once abandoned was now the family he was learning to cherish. As he looked at Rachel, he realized that this new beginning was something they had built together. The future was still uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. And no matter what came next, they would face it together. The journey ahead would be different from what he had once imagined, but it would be real, and it would be theirs. With each passing day, Ethan was becoming the father he had always wanted to be, and Rachel was rediscovering the love that had once seemed lost. Together, they had created something stronger than any business venture could offer. A family built on second chances, trust, and hope. Years passed, and the family continued to grow, each chapter unfolding with new challenges, victories, and moments of quiet joy. Ethan, Rachel, and the children had become a team, bound not only by blood but by the understanding that their past mistakes had shaped them, and their shared journey had the power to heal. Ethan's business empire continued to thrive, but it was no longer the center of his universe. He had learned that success was not measured by profit margins or industry accolades, but by the impact he had on the people who mattered most to him. He found fulfillment not in boardrooms, but in school plays, late-night talks with Caleb about his future career, and weekends spent hiking with Noah and Emma. He was present in ways he had never been before, and it brought him a peace he had once thought unattainable. Rachel, too, had flourished. She had embraced her role not only as a mother but as a woman who had rediscovered her own strength and purpose. The years of being a single mother had shaped her, but so had the love and support that now surrounded her. Together with Ethan, they navigated the complexities of raising 4 children, each of whom brought their own unique challenges and joys. And as the children grew, so did their relationships with Ethan. They had come to see him not just as their father, but as someone who had fought for their place in their lives. They had learned the value of forgiveness, of second chances, and of how family, in all its forms, could be the most beautiful and complex thing in the world. At family gatherings, Rachel would look across the table at Ethan, now more than just a partner, but a true co-parent, and she would smile. The journey they had taken together, one that had been full of doubt, pain, and healing, was the very thing that had brought them closer than they ever imagined. Their story, though not without its scars, was one of redemption. And as they faced the future together, there was a deep understanding between them all, that the greatest gift they could give each other was simply to show up, to love without conditions, and to cherish the moments that made up their beautiful, imperfect life. The future was wide open, full of possibilities, and they were ready to embrace it together. We want to extend a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you for taking the time to listen to this story and watch the video. We truly appreciate your support, and we hope you found inspiration and connection in the journey we've shared together. If you enjoyed the story, please make sure to give this video a like and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more amazing stories and content coming your way. Your feedback and engagement mean the world to us, and we can't wait to continue bringing you more exciting adventures. Thank you again, and we look forward to having you with us on the next chapter.